All right, hello everybody. We are talking Children of the Lens today. So, how to start this one? I've been trying to figure it out, and I think I have a good idea, but basically, this is the last book in the Lensman series. It, in the same way that the previous books have kind of been presented as a historian writing about these things after the fact, this one is presented similarly, but a little bit differently. There's a little trick at the end that I'm not going to spoil, but the writer of this book is Kimball Kinnison's son, Christopher Kinnison. And we see that at the very start where he kind of gives the usual historical introduction. You know, crime was getting bigger, so we needed someone who had larger, universal jurisdiction, yada, yada, yada. This book takes place 20 years approximately, I think it's about 20 years, after the end of Second Stage Lensman. And, Second Stage Lensman ended with Kimball Kinnison and Clarissa McDougall finally, tying the knot. In the meantime, they have had 5 children, 1 boy and 2 pairs of twin girls. We have Christopher, Kit. We have Catherine, Kat. Karen, Kay. Camilla, Cam. And Constance, Con. So all of these kids now have 3-letter designations for their names, which is convenient, if a little bit confusing sometimes. So, and what this book is about, basically, is kind of the adventures of these 5 kids, plus the 5 second-ish stage lensmen that were the stars of the previous book. So we have Kim and Tregency and Wursel and Clarissa herself and Nadric, who was introduced in the previous book. It's kind of their adventures and their efforts to finally, once and for all, maybe, defeat, the Eddorians and the Bosconians and, protect, or rather create a safe galaxy or several galaxies for civilization as they see it. So the book starts with Christopher kind of getting his lens. He legitimately goes through the lens school, the military, school, and gets a lens. They want to make him a gray lensman immediately, and he's like, no, I got to do at least one mission first, kind of thing. So there's a little bit of interesting details there, and then the story kind of runs off. It is, considering that we, instead of having, because in the previous books we had kind of little bits and pieces of the other second stage lensmen, but it was mostly Kim, right? It was mostly Kimball Kinnison and his adventures. And so there was a great deal of focus in the narrative. Everything was about what Kim was doing, what was happening to him, what he was planning, where he was going, what disguises he was jumping into, kind of thing. Whereas in this one, we now have 6 characters, or 6 groups of characters, technically, who are kind of all flitting about the galaxy, or the galaxy and the second galaxy, all at once. So, Kim has kind of taken off the mantle of the Grey Lensman. He's now the galactic coordinator. But at the start of the book, he's like, oh, I gotta get back to work. And, there's a couple of lines about how he's a little older, but he's still pretty darn good at his job, kind of thing. And so he takes on the mantle of the Grey again. So Christopher, Kit, is another thread of the story. And then each of the 4 girls actually kind of has, attached herself to one of the second stage lensmen, where Kat seems to be most connected to Kim himself. Karen, is connected to Nadric most closely. Camilla, Cam, is connected to Tregency most closely. And Constance, is connected to Wursel most closely. And the second stage lensman that they are connected with kind of affects their most powerful skill. They're all very strong. And the thing that you learn early on is that these 4 girls were basically born with lens capabilities, and they just don't, they're just like, oh, it's just natural to us. And this is, of course, we've heard in the earlier books that the Arisians were kind of planning this kind of, breeding program to get what they needed to beat Boscone, beat Eddore, and I'm a little surprised that it happened that abruptly, but there it is. So each of these kids kind of gets their own particular skills or their own particular strongest skills from the second stage lensmen that they're attached to. So Kat kind of gets the straightforwardness, the force, the drive that Kim has to complete the mission, to get everything done, to keep driving forward when you could easily have just through lazy thinking said, oh, mission's done, we're good to go. No, you keep going. You think about, well, do we have any leads to a higher up? So Kat kind of gets that trait from him. Kay is associated with Nadrek, and she gets the quality of yieldlessness. She's actually called, quote, the ultimate of defense at one point in the book, which is a little weird because nobody else gets the ultimate of blah title as far as I can tell. I only saw it for her, and I kept expecting it for the others, and it just didn't happen. Cam is connected with Tregency, and so she is best at perception and calculation, just like Tregency is. And then Khan is connected with Wursel. There's some really nice, cute interactions between Khan and Wursel, where he's like a super long, like reptilian snake kind of character, and so there's this one point where they're all getting together to kind of plan their next move, and it describes her as like taking a few of the loops of Wursel off of a thing that he was coiled around, kicking them into a chase lounge, and taking a seat there. Kind of a neat little image there. But the power that she kind of gets from her association with Wursel is the ability to control hallucinations, to create figments of the mind, false memories, and also, she's the most powerful attacker of the group. She has the most killer instinct, and so, this is kind of a clever way to get around the only one female lensman statement that we got earlier on, right? They're not lensmen because they didn't go to Arisia to get their lenses. They were just born with these special abilities. That has, that's a clever way around the thing, but at the same time, it has the downside of kind of turning these 5 kids into effectively Supermen. And we thought Kim was bad for his Superman qualities. The Kimball children are actually far more ridiculous as to their capabilities, and how quickly they achieve them. So what's the kind of a plot synopsis is that what's going on is that there's these kind of whole planetary systems are collapsing one by one. What happens is that a couple of groups pop up, and like dissident groups, and then those dissident groups kind of build things up, and entire planetary cultures are kind of failing. We have head presidents of certain planets being kidnapped, things like that. We have what's called the hellhole in space, which is basically this area of space where there doesn't seem to be anything there, but if you go there, you go nuts, and you become psychotically violent, and everybody kills each other on the ship, and you end up with these derelicts with a couple of mad words written in blood, kind of thing. Nice little mystery there. Early on, we're told that the Faustin, the bad guy from the previous book, we thought he was something, and he turned out to be something else, and then they switcheroo him again early on in the book, which is, I think, kind of a funny thing for them for Smith to do, but that's what he did. And then we have 2 planets, Eddore and Plur, which are kind of referenced throughout the book, and the goal is to take both of these out as they're the top of the food chain for Eddore and Boscone. We have 2 more disguises by Kim Kinnison. We have a little bit less of the future slang that we kind of have gotten used to. There's a lot of QXs, but not a whole lot of anything else. So, to give the plot synopsis, the goal is for them to take out Eddore and Plur and to knock out and disorganize, at least cut the head off of the organization that has been counter to civilization. And so there's all these elements going together. There's all these different plot threads where each of these kids is kind of going off on his or her own adventures. As for new ideas, like science fiction ideas, there's a few new things here. We have more playing around with the nth space and hyperspatial tubes that we saw in the previous book, especially. There was that thing in the previous book where they kind of got lost in this super light speed fake universe kind of thing, and they had to find their way out in that book. In this book, they have to figure out a way to use that as a military asset, and so there's some fun there. We have we've heard We've heard examples of, it hasn't been a huge element of the story so far, but in this one we have a fairly strong appearance of the Lensman's Load, which is kind of like a noblesse oblige, but for Lensmen. We have Black Lensmen, as opposed to the Gray Lensmen, the good guys. Eddore's group also has some kind of pseudo-lens, and this has been a recurring theme throughout the book, right? That whatever tech, whatever abilities, whatever innovations the Arisian side makes, it doesn't take very long for the Eddorian side to make similar innovations. And we haven't seen any counter to the lens yet, so now's the time. And then the other kind of new idea that I think is interesting in this is called the unit, and that is kind of like a mental connection that Kit and his four sisters can make to kind of become like a mind bolt Voltron kind of thing. I'm oversimplifying it, but it's kind of, considering that the first thing I heard about this book series was that it was a Japanese animation. This was kind of more of the thing that I was expecting early on, and well, we waited for the last book, but there it is. As for the actual kind of like quality of the story, we get kind of the same kind of swashbuckling action that we've seen. A little bit of intrigue here and there where Kim is in disguise and kind of making a plot to get around the bad guys or figure out who's the mastermind kind of thing. The problem is that, and it's not exactly a problem, but it's kind of a double-edged sword. This kind of 5 perspective, and technically 6 perspective thing, it's kind of a double-edged sword because you end up jumping back and forth between character and character so frequently and so rapidly that you don't really settle in with any of the characters like we did with Kim in the previous books. It's cool to see these multiple story threads kind of meet, and it's cool to see these interactions, especially the interactions between the Kimball daughters and the Kinnison daughters and the the non-human second stage lensman is very fun. It's very delightful to read. But we do end up jumping around a lot, and so the book does suffer from a lack of detail, which is something that we've actually seen increase throughout most of the series, right? Like, I kind of complained a little bit that in Triplanetary, was it Triplanetary? Triplanetary, that like the ships were orbs with guns on them, right? And over the course of the series, the ships have gotten more and more complex and more concrete in what they kind of look like. In fact, they were orbs with guns on them in the first book. We find out much to my mirth, right? But unfortunately, a lot of that detail we've been building up for the previous several books kind of gets tossed by the wayside in this one, which is kind of, I think, its biggest flaw, in that we get like one big space battle, but it's almost glossed over. It's covered in so little detail. It's like, oh, here's our big, tank for handling all of the tactics for this battle, and then, oh, we did this, and it took a few minutes, and we're done, kind of thing. And then we went here, and we did the same thing, and it's kind of done. We don't get, fun descriptions of like, oh, these two came in with the tractor beams, and these ones sheared them, but this one had a magnetic connector, and here come the maulers, and we don't get much of that in this book, which is, I think, a little bit of a shame. In fact, the tone of the whole book is a little bit rushed, hurried even. There's tons of stuff going on, which, to its credit, there's a lot of cool different plot threads that are all kind of making their way toward each other in a very Kinnison kind of way. But again, the detail does suffer quite a bit. There is some fun detail about the Kinnison daughters interacting with the second stage lensman. That's the place where we get the most detail pretty much in the book, and that part's fun. So, like, to give kind of an overall impression of the book, I would say that compared to the previous book, compared to the first book, the details are not that much, worse, right? Or the details are comparable to the first book. But compared to the previous book, which is the one that we, just went, and the one before that, where things have been kind of getting more and more fleshed out, we kind of end up with like, oh yeah, this happened, and that's the result, and let's move on to the next thing. It really feels like like Smith kind of wanted to be... It kind of feels like Smith wanted to be done, in the sense that he was like, well, if I wanted to do this properly, I'd probably do one book for each of the kids, but I'm not going to do that. There's no freaking way, because that would be another 5 books plus this one, right? And so we end up kind of compressing all of that character development into the size of one book, and again, it does suffer because of that. None of the characters are fleshed out nearly as well as Kimball is in the previous books. There's some other fun stuff in the book. For instance, in this book in particular, Smith puts in a bunch of little bits about... They're kind of like self-referential or self-deprecating jokes about science fiction and about space opera in particular. There's... one of the disguises that Kimball picks up is that of an author of space opera. And so we get a lot of him talking about the stuff he's writing, which is deliberately silly, as well as some of his fellow authors and authoresses who also have some rather fun and funny and kind of silly things that they write in the great genre of space opera. There's a science idea in this that I find interesting, but unfortunately it's not fleshed out very well. Is this they have a method for like classifying creatures, and the way that it is stated in the book is that it's like, it's a bunch of letters, Z, Q, W, R, T, and they even have some points in it where they talk about how like each new letter is effectively a decimal point. It's higher accuracy. And so it's like, general shape, general intelligence level, general something, temperature, habitat, skin type, yada, 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 as you go down the list. And it's used in a few places to kind of say, hey, this being that we met over here and this being that we met over here, they're actually classified very similarly. Are they related to each other? And is that something that we need to be aware of? Is this something that has to do with Eddore and stuff that we're trying to fight against, right? Unfortunately, the letter classification thing is never really fleshed out in any meaningful way. And so like if I wanted to try to like reproduce it, I would not be able to do so. There's like a couple of points where like they say that, this letter in the 4th position means that it has a skin like this kind of thing, but that's it. There's not a whole lot there for it. So it ends up feeling a little confusing and a little superfluous, which, whatever. It's a very minor part of the book. I mentioned that, we have the unit in this book, which is basically like a mental Voltron. I expected this kind of thing going in, and finally 6 books in, we actually see it. And to be fair, it's not quite as flashy or what's the word I want there? It's not quite as, concrete as like Voltron would be, right? Like what they're doing is they're kind of connecting their minds to each other, and so they can do mental combat as a combined unit that way, as opposed to like them building and jumping into giant robots that literally connect together. It's figurative, not literal, I guess is what I'm trying to say. There's a neat little twist at the end, at the very, very end, because again, the start of the book we get like kind of a hey, I'm Christopher Kinnison. I wrote this book as a historical, purpose, as a historical record of this final fight against Eddore. And at the very end, he comes back kind of as a narrator, and we get something there that is kind of interesting. And so it's a little silly on one hand, but it's also kind of interesting. So it's worth not spoiling that. But it'd be something that might entice you to read the book. The other thing about the book being so jumpy, about having the plot be so unfocused in general, is that the pace is really frantic. Like, this book was a page turner. Like, I just sat down and I was chick for hours, because it's pretty long too. But at the end, the next day after reading the book, I was like, I don't remember a lot of the things that happened in detail, because it was just like, this happens, and then this other totally unrelated thing happens, and this other totally unrelated thing happens, and you kind of get a little bit especially if you're reading it relatively, quickly. You kind of get to the point where you're like, wait, was it this character that did this, or was it this character that did this, and did this happen after this, or was it before this, kind of thing. You get that feeling, or at least I did, because I don't feel like I was like sleepwalking through it when I read it. I read it in like 2 or 3 sittings. I didn't feel like I was especially rushed. I did want to finish the book, but and it was something where I was like, okay, I want to see what happens next. I want to see what happens next. I want to see what happens next. But I did end up kind of not having a good long-term memory of what happened in the book, even on the 24-hour timescale. Whereas I did not have to go back and look at the earlier books that much to make my notes for the for the review as much as this one. This one I went back and I'm like, oh, it was this, and then this person was called the Ultimate of Defense, and it was this person, not this person. And then, she was associated with this second stage lensman, but was anyone else called the Ultimate of blah? And not really, no. Okay, that's weird. It was one of those things where I actually had to go back and go through and kind of skim through the book quite a bit as I was making the notes for this. And the other books have not been... The other books have stuck with me a little bit better than this one, and I think that the disjointed storyline is to blame for that. Another thing about this book that is fun is that we get to see a lot of repeats and returns of side characters that have appeared throughout the series, side areas. We head back to Lyrane. There's some intrigue there. We get to see all the second stage lensmen, including Clarissa, who now gets some legitimate second stage powers. Go do missions and stuff like that. We get to see a lot of cool things happen. It's just there's so much going on that it's kind of easy to say, "Ooh, wait, was it this person that did this, or was it this person that did this?" So that's kind of my review. I don't want to spoil too much, so I just kind of some rough character descriptions and the kind of a overall plot synopsis, as well as kind of some of the cool ideas, some of the pluses and minuses of the organization of the book. I figure I'll probably do a little bit more on Lensman series, but not going to be in a hurry for it, because there's a bunch of short stories attached to the end of the super pack that I bought. So I have a bunch of short stories that are that are apparently addressed to Robert Heinlein as dedicated, or they were they start with a hey, Heinlein, to Robert Heinlein kind of thing, where I guess Smith was talking with him as he was writing these short stories that I may talk about a little bit. I may go watch the movie and see what that one is like and kind of bring it back to the rest of the series. But again, not in a hurry to do that at this point, but I figured just a real short retrospective just to kind of close things off here. I think probably my favorite book is Second Stage Lensman. It was very quotable. It had a lot of detailed adventure. It had a lot of detailed disguises. It had a lot of cool ideas. Gray Lensman was close. It was kind of neck and neck with Second Stage Lensman as far as that goes. There were some cool actual space fights in Gray Lensman. In Second Stage Lensman, it was more about the Kimball disguises and stuff like that. But I definitely got a lot of cool quotes out of Second Stage Lensman, and Gray Lensman is, I think, my close second. That one was also relatively quotable, had some detailed adventure, had lots and lots of neat disguises, very different disguises, had a lot of great ideas, both practical and fanciful, right? There was that multi-axial silver bus bar thing that they had that was kind of interesting in Gray Lensman. The reason that I think Second Stage Lensman nudges out above Gray Lensman is that it had a lot of those positive characteristics of Gray Lensman, but it also had the character of Nadrek, who I think is really, really a really neat character. Even though he doesn't we don't get to see a lot of the things that he does, but he's still kind of interesting, and the way that he talks and discusses things and goes to work is kind of interesting. The concept of Children of the Lens is strong, very interesting. There's all kinds of cool stuff going on there. These kids that have been born as the culmination of this, thousands of year old breeding program by the Eurasians, the final fight with Eddore kind of thing. And the thing in Gray Lensman that I think is also really really great is the extended adventure of with Wurzel, which I think was in that book, or was it in Galactic Patrol? I wrote it down as being in. No, I didn't. I wrote it down as something that was missed out of. Yeah, so I think that was actually Galactic Patrol. So the Galactic Patrol also had that really extended, interesting adventure where they're trying to get away from the Bosconians with that data. That was also something really cool. Then we have kind of the cool pulpiness of the first book, Triplanetary, and I might have those names flipped. Triplanetary was the first book, yeah. Galactic Patrol was the third book, but the first one written chronologically. The first one completed chronologically. Anyway, it's been a fun series. If you like pulpy science fiction stuff, I definitely recommend this. It's got some kind of, interesting cultural artifacts to it that you might kind of have to, work through a little bit depending on your particular perspective on things. But all in all, it was a fun series to read, and worthwhile look at what real pulp space opera was like back in the 1940s. So with that, I'll say thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. If you like what I'm doing with the channel, you know what to do. And I will see you next time with I don't even know what, but we'll figure it out. Have a good week, everybody, and I will see you all later.